AMD stock just reported earnings, and for the day it was down roughly 1.4%, and after hours the stock is down another 6.3%. This means earnings were bad, right? Right? Well, on today's episode, I want to share my overall thoughts and probably some of the biggest mistakes that AMD investors might be making right now. So let's take a closer look in today's episode.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for their subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode.
All right, so first, let me just start off with my overall thoughts on earnings. And this is a quick look at what the market was expecting for earnings this quarter. So we were expecting around $7.4 billion in revenue and roughly $8.3 billion for guidance. Now, AMD actually delivered on both ends. So AMD's revenue was $7.7 billion, beating the 7.43 estimates. And for the guidance, they gave us $8.7 billion, beating that 8.3 billion estimate. And the craziest thing about this guidance is that it does not include any revenue from AMD's Instant MI308 shipments, which is their AI accelerator to China, as their license applications are currently under review by the US government. So first, if you were to tell me, Jose, AMD's earnings were horrible, I would say that's pretty much false. I think AMD's earnings were actually pretty strong. Now, I'll talk a little bit why I believe the stock is down, but I also want to mention one thing, especially when it comes to guidance. So someone responded here that 8.7 billion without China is loud. Guidance like that speaks volume. And I say 100%, especially since the AMD team tends to be conservative on guidance. So assuming a conservative guidance plus adding any additional China market, and we'll talk about the China market in a bit, AMD can provide a very, I said healthy, but I believe it can provide a massive beat compared to this 8.7 billion on the midpoint, which is again, much higher than what analysts were expecting. I believe next quarter, if things continue to go with this way, we can even see a $9.2 billion revenue for AMD. Now, again, these are top level numbers on revenue for this quarter and for guidance, and I believe earnings were amazing on those regards. Now, earlier in this episode or at the intro, I mentioned that there is a major issue with some AMD community and maybe some new AMD investors. The first thing is they're looking at AMD saying it's the next NVIDIA. And so we're going to see one of the things is data center market is not growing at that type of level. I wouldn't consider this the next NVIDIA, but I don't believe AMD can benefit dramatically from the AI space. But I think the expectations of being the next NVIDIA creates unrealistic expectations for quarters like today. I saw some crazy analysts that are for high tech companies saying, I'm surprised this inference inflection point hasn't taken AMD to new levels just yet. And it's like, if you've been following channels like mine, if you've been listening to the discussions we have in this channel, you would have been aware that this wasn't the quarter that was going to be that quarter for AMD. So there's sometimes unrealistic expectations from analysts. There's even viral tweets going around that kind of show that this is the next big thing. I do believe it is, but some of the reasoning saying like explicit use by Meta platforms, that's not true. Meta platform still uses a lot of NVIDIA. So I think the moment the market sees AMD as this individual company and no longer as the next NVIDIA, we will give this company the proper kind of expectations. Now, again, I do believe AMD provided amazing earnings. I think this is definitely a multi-bagger play in the next few years. Long term, I am a shareholder and I will believe this is going to be a 500+ billion company at minimum in the next few years. It could actually be much larger than that. Now, what are some other things? So, here we go. AMD's quarter was strong in my opinion, better than expected. But if you are expecting more from AMD this quarter due to the inference inflection point, you are probably one, following the wrong people, don't listen to AMD calls or investors conference, and not familiar with the AI supply chain. If you want to change all that, make sure to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button, as this is going to be the best place you're going to get any semiconductor news in general. I also do have a free semiconductor newsletter. Check the link down below, but it's called What the Chip Happened Fiscalai.com. Let's check it out really quick here. And again, almost on a daily basis, I release a lot of news about the semiconductor space. Next, the final thing I want to kind of promote is my partnership with Fiscal.ai, Fiscal.ai/Jose, for amazing charts. If you are serious about investing, this is the platform for you. It's extremely cheap, in my opinion. You get 15% off with the link down below. Now, I kind of want to look at some of the charts before we look at some other stuff for AMD. So the first thing, though, we should know is I believe earnings were great. I'll probably talk a little bit later on if I would be buying or selling at these positions. And obviously, I wouldn't be selling, but would I be buying right now? But first, let's look at total revenue. So total revenue is $7.69 billion. This is a record revenue for them. Now, we are going to see they did take a hit with the Chinese market, and revenue could have been a lot higher than this. The other thing that we are seeing is this is the crazy thing, the data center market, right? Data center revenue has actually gone down sequentially for the past 2 quarters. And this is what a lot of investors are seeing as the bearish case. How can this be the next AI stock when every AI company is increasing capital expenditure, but you as a whole are losing revenue on a sequential basis? Shouldn't you be seeing sequential growth for the next few years? And that is true. But for AMD, you have a few things. And I actually even covered it in one of these tweets. Let me see if I can find it really quickly here. Maybe it was in this one. So someone mentioned it was weak for real. And then I asked how so. And someone was wondering, how is this even possible? The market is growing exponentially, but yet 2 back-to-back quarters of decline in data center revenue. And I say that's a true point. But you have to remember, there was the loss of the MI308 in China. It's also important to know that the MI300 is not a competitive product. There wasn't much growth right now, and many people aren't buying the MI300 right now. It's also important to know that the MI355, which is somewhat competitive, I wouldn't say it's a NVIDIA killer, but somewhat competitive, is just starting off. So in my opinion, it's about guidance. And I do believe the AMD story starts in Q3. And that's when we're going to continue to see a nice sequential growth throughout multiple years for AMD. Maybe you might have a quarter or two where you have a slip up, but I think the overall trend from here on out is going to be up. This is the main reason it is down right now. That MI300, let's just be honest, it kind of sucks. It kind of sucks. The MI355, though, it's okay. The MI400, that's where the story really kicks in. So again, data center revenue, I can see the story if you're just looking at a still frame. But if you want to look at the futuristic frame of the next few quarters, I think things are going to change completely. Now, the other things we see here is the data center market, while it is down, they are seeing growth in things like their total client and gaming. And we are kind of finally seeing a form of a bottom in the embedded revenue market, which I think is pretty good because if you look at operating incomes, you do see things somewhat improving. I mean, the client and operating income market are up a nice amount. Now, I also think that Wall Street and a lot of investors get a lot of freaked out, right? I mean, we saw revenue growth decline, but you also see data center operating income actually be down. This is the first time you've seen this for the past few years. And many are wondering, Jose, does this mean that AMD might be selling their chips at super cheap price? And what's going on here? The main thing happening here right now is that MI308 platform. Because of those kind of write-off in things, that was a write-off on the data center market, which focus made this kind of negative, right? So in my opinion, ignore these numbers and we're going to see the numbers not including that. So if you are hearing bear thesis of this being negative, I would say ignore it. It pretty much has to do with that one-time charge. And pretty much same here. This is that gross profit margins. It took a massive hit compared to a quarter ago when it was kind of trending nicely upwards. But again, it has to do with the China market. These numbers would be a lot higher if it wasn't for that. And we will continue to see an uptrend. So I do believe for AMD, the AI story is coming. It's really coming. And I think Q3 is going to be the spark of that. Now, I have some pretty cool slides that I want to show you and a pretty cool website presentation that I've created, but a few more updates for AI investors in AMD. So for the quarter, these restrictions of the MI308, which is the China restrictions on export controls, led to approximately $800 million in inventory and related charges. Excluding these charges, non-GAAP gross margins would have been roughly 54%. That is massive. They also mentioned, Lisa Su mentions, that they deliver strong revenue growth in the second quarter, led by record server and PC processor sales. We are seeing robust demand across our computing and AI product portfolio and are well positioned to deliver significant growth in the second half of the year, driven by the ramp of our AMD Instinct MI350 X series accelerator and ongoing EPYC and Ryzen processor. Now, I think this is actually pretty telling for one thing. Look at this. So, if you look at the data center market, there are two biggest data center markets last year where quarters were quarter three and quarter four. And now AMD says that for quarter three and quarter four of this year, they're actually going to see year over year revenue increase. That means these numbers for the next 2 years are going to be much higher than this. And this is why I'm saying the AI story for AMD is finally starting. What else do we hear from AMD? They mentioned that the gaming revenue was 1.1 billion. Main reason is there was semi-custom revenue and strong AMD Radeon GPU demand. So right now it seems like the Xbox and PlayStation are buying chips right now for the holiday seasons. This is another thing. This is, to me, the most bullish thing. For me, as an AMD investor, I think the next generation, the Helios rack, which is going to be for the MI400, that is going to be the system that's going to be dramatic revenue driver for AMD in 2026. And we actually had some updates on that as well. Now, in terms of the PowerPoint presentation, I think I highlighted a few things that investors should know. Here, yes, so we saw non-GAAP gross margins were 43% year over year. But if you exclude the charges from the China's export restriction, it would actually have been 54%, much higher than it is right now. And it would have been a sequential growth, year over year growth. The other thing is, if you look at non-GAAP earnings per share, it was a loss. It was 48 cents, but that inventory charge cost about 43 cents. So it would have been closer to 91 cents. So a nice year over year growth as well. There were a few other things that I had circled, I think. Nope, I think that was it. Those were the two things I had circled. Now, I do have some quick brief on some of the things for Outlook, and then I'm going to share my overall thoughts if I would be buying the stock at these levels. So first, the MI350 production and revenue outlook. So AMD initiated volume production of the MI350 in June, ahead of schedule. The company projects a steep production ramp in the later half of 2025 to fulfill larger scale deployments for multiple clients. Instant GPU revenue is forecasted to grow year over year in quarter three, directly fueled by this accelerated MI350 ramp up. So again, this is, I think the quarter three is going to be massive for AMD. And I'm pretty excited about this. When I mean massive, though, right, I don't expect, let's look at these data center, and I want to bring expectations back to reality. I don't expect 100% growth, right? I don't expect from 3.5 to go to 7 billion. What I expect is probably from 3.55 a year ago to maybe get closer to about 4 billion, 4.2 billion, right? That's the type of growth, which will still be a nice record revenue for AMD. What else do we have here? So we also have adoption dynamics and market competition. So Lisa Su reports that the adoption of the MI355 is outpacing the MI300, and customer interest is broader and initial deployments are significantly larger. That's where we're going to see that year-over-year growth here in the next quarter. They also mentioned that the MI350 is positioned as a very competitive against NVIDIA's B200 and GB200 family. I'm not too sure there. I'm NVIDIA first. I don't want to say they're completely competitive, but it does give a second choice. Now, the strategic roadmap, right? I am a firm believer that the MI400 series is going to be the IT platform. And the MI400 and the ambitious Helios rack scale platform are slated for 2026. AMD mentions that they anticipate a significant revenue contribution from Helios in 2026. So we expect a nice growth year from the MI400 in 2026, which I believe is an early indication that the AI story is starting for AMD. We already know kind of the MI350 is going to do really good here in the second half, in the first half of next year. And then you're going to have Helios come out most likely in the second half of 2026. And you're going to continue to see that AI story continue to grow. Now, in forms of geopolitical headwinds and China market, the market that we saw is export restrictions kind of hit that 800 million in inventories and related charges. These sales were effective immediately, but there are some progress. Lisa Su expressed optimism, and she is very pleased with the progress that's been made with the administration. AMD is actively working with the US government and has multiple license applications under review with the Department of Commerce. The company's position is described as better than they were 90 days ago. Once licenses are approved, AMD plans to commence MI308 shipments through clearing the work in progress inventory, though clearing the work in progress inventory will take a couple of quarters. So remember what I mentioned in guidance, right? Guidance was not including any China revenue, but there is a bullish sentiment that that could be approved. So again, I do believe AMD's third quarter of 2025 will beat expectations dramatically. And I do believe we're going to see some price targets increases throughout the week. Now, what else do I have here? Gross margins. So there was a gross margins, kind of the MI product is what kind of gross margins is it? And the CFO mentions that it's a little bit below corporate average. So for that reason, we're most likely going to stay in the low 50s in forms of gross margins, especially as this continues to ramp up. However, the company's primary strategy is not margin optimization. Instead, the focus is on capturing market share and providing customers with a better total cost of ownership to expand their presence in the market. So right now, they're just trying to spread like wildfire, even if it's a little bit below corporate average. So I do believe we're going to continue to see gross margins as this becomes a bigger portion of total revenue, maybe get closer to the 50s. So something to keep a note of. The final thing is the gaming market. Nothing too crazy here, but customers were ramping inventory in preparation for the upcoming holiday season, indicating that the industry has moved past supply chain disruptions of previous years. So overall, everything I heard here is that the future for AMD is looking pretty healthy. Sure, this quarter might have not been the best, but that guidance is strong. Second half of this year is going to be strong for AMD. First half of next year with the MI350 and the low comps this quarter is going to be amazing. The China market reopening is going to be strong. And the late 2026, you have the MI400 and Helios, and you're seeing strong adoption and faster adoption by customers. Things look healthy again, especially if you're not looking at AMD as the next NVIDIA. I think that's the biggest thing. I think we need to separate from that view outlook. But at a market cap of $282 billion, in the market that is growing dramatically, in the market that they are providing somewhat competitive products, I still believe this is a multi-backer opportunity. So will I be buying at these levels? I'm honestly not sure. AMD is already a big position in my portfolio with a lot lower dollar cost average. If I was to add right now, it would be very small dollar cost averaging. Again, I believe this is a market beater. So small dollar cost averaging is the best opportunity for me. If we see some massive pullouts closer to 130s, maybe 140s, I'm not saying we're going to get there, but if we do, that's when I turn that dollar cost averaging a lot heavier. And anything lower, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. So right now, maybe a little bit of new money coming in. I might buy a few shares here and there, but my position on AMD is already pretty big. So super excited here for the future, but I wouldn't mind dollar cost averaging. This isn't a place where I would be loading the boat, because the semiconductor market tends to give us opportunities. Obviously, stock prices can continue to go higher, and that's why I don't mind small dollar cost averaging. But if we kind of look at, let's say, the 1 year time frame, my investment style is like when we see ramp ups like this, is small dollar cost averaging. When we start to see pull downs, that's when I tend to go heavier and heavier, and then I shift back to smaller because the market is typically cyclical. So take care, have a good day, and see you all next time.